On a Tuesday afternoon in Kanazawa, a 12-year-old boy named Soda sits on the wooden steps of his family's engawa, the narrow veranda that runs along the outer edge of the house, facing the garden. He has no device in his hands, no book, no toy, no task assigned to him. School finished an hour ago. His mother is inside preparing dinner, and she has not suggested anything for him to do, because in this household, as in many Japanese households of a particular generation, the unstructured afternoon is not a problem to be solved. Soda is simply sitting. He watches a beetle make its way across the flat surface of a stepping stone. He watches it stop. He watches it change direction. Several minutes pass in which, from the outside, absolutely nothing is happening. Then, slowly, the boy reaches into the garden, picks up a small stone, and begins arranging a series of them along the edge of the step in a pattern that seems to follow some private logic known only to him. His face is calm. His eyes are focused in the particular way that happens when the mind has found something genuinely interesting, not because someone handed it to him, but because he arrived there himself, through the corridor of having nothing else to do. What Sota is doing, what his mother is quietly allowing, is something that is disappearing from the lives of children and adults across the developed world at a speed that researchers describe as alarming. Not because anyone decided to take it away, because something was placed in its path, something bright and urgent and perfectly engineered to ensure that the corridor Sota walked through, that slightly uncomfortable stretch of emptiness between one thing and the next, is never reached at all. And the cost of losing it, neuroscience is now discovering, is far greater than anyone anticipated. Because boredom is not the absence of something valuable. Boredom, it turns out, is itself the valuable thing. And Japan, in its quiet, intuitive way, has known this long enough to have built an entire philosophy around it. The first concept you need is one that Japanese culture has carried for over 1,000 years, most visibly in its arts, its architecture, and its approach to time. Ma, pronounced ma, written with a single elegant character depicting a gate through which moonlight passes, the image of light moving through an interval, through a space between things. Ma is translated most simply as negative space or meaningful pause, but the translation is insufficient because it implies emptiness, and Ma is not empty. Ma is the idea that the space between things is not nothing. It is the condition that gives the things on either side of it their meaning, their definition, their weight. The silence between two musical notes is what makes both notes audible. The pause in a conversation is what gives the words that follow their gravity. The blank wall in a Japanese room is not a failure of decoration. It is a deliberate invitation to the eye to rest, and through that rest, to see more clearly. When applied to time, to the structure of a life, to the rhythm of a day, Ma becomes a radical proposition. It suggests that the unscheduled hours are not wasted hours, that the afternoon with nothing in it is not a failure of productivity, that the mind allowed to drift, to wander, to arrive at boredom and remain there without immediately escaping, is a mind being given something it cannot receive any other way. The Japanese have arranged their spaces, their rituals, and their relationship with time around this understanding for centuries. The tea ceremony is Ma-made ritual, every pause intentional, every silence respected, the unhurried interval honored as much as the act it surrounds. The rock garden offers the eye nowhere urgent to go, and in that nowhere, something opens. The engawa, where Sota sits, exists architecturally as a threshold, neither inside nor outside, neither busy nor abandoned, a space specifically designed for the unstructured in-between. The West has a very different relationship with this interval. In fact, the West has declared war on it. The average American adult now checks their phone 244 times per day. That is once every 4 minutes across waking hours. And the research is unambiguous about what drives that behavior. It is not connection-seeking, not information-seeking, not even entertainment-seeking in any meaningful sense. It is discomfort avoidance. The specific discomfort of having nothing immediately stimulating to process. A study conducted by researchers at the University of Virginia and published in the journal Science asked participants to sit alone in a room with nothing to do for between 6 and 15 minutes. They were given one option if the silence became unbearable. They could press a button that would administer a mild electric shock to themselves. The finding was remarkable and widely reported, but still somehow insufficient in its impact on public behavior. 2/3 of men and 1/4 of women chose the electric shock over continued silence. They chose pain over boredom. The discomfort of an unoccupied mind had become, for many people, genuinely intolerable, more intolerable than physical pain. This is not a character flaw in the people who pressed the button. It is the predictable result of a decade of conditioning. Every app on every device is engineered by some of the most sophisticated behavioral psychologists in the world to do one specific thing: eliminate the interval, remove the pause, ensure that the moment any natural lull appears in your attention, the moment Soda's corridor begins to open, something rushes in to fill it before your nervous system has the chance to settle into it. The scroll is infinite, so there is no natural stopping point. The autoplay begins before the credits finish, so there is no moment of transition. The notification arrives precisely when engagement would otherwise drop. Boredom to the attention economy is a gap in revenue, and the gap has been engineered nearly shut. But inside that gap, inside the specific neurological state that emerges when the mind is given nothing external to process and nothing urgent to respond to, something happens that cannot happen any other way. And what it produces is something you almost certainly wish you had more of. Researchers at the University of Central Lancashire, publishing in the Academy of Management Discoveries, conducted a series of experiments examining what happens to creative output when participants first experience boredom. In one experiment, participants were assigned an intensely boring task, copying numbers from a phone book for an extended period before being given a standard creative thinking assessment. Against the expectations of the researchers and against the assumptions of almost every participant, those who experienced boredom before the assessment significantly outperformed those who began the creative task directly. The bored mind, the researchers concluded, does not simply idle. It activates a specific and precious cognitive mode, one characterized by spontaneous, associative, non-linear thinking that produces connections between ideas, solutions to problems, and imaginative possibilities that focused, directed thinking cannot reach. Boredom is not the enemy of creativity. It is one of creativity's primary conditions. This connects directly to what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activate specifically when the mind is not focused on any external task. For years, this network was considered the brain at rest, doing nothing of particular importance. Researchers now understand it differently. The default mode network is where the brain processes experience, consolidates memory, generates self-knowledge, and critically produces the spontaneous, unconstrained thinking that underlies both creative insight and the ability to understand other people. It is the network that activates when you are in the shower and the solution to a problem you have been stuck on for days suddenly arrives. When you are on a long walk with nothing to listen to and you understand, without quite knowing why, what you actually want your life to look like. When you drift into the specific kind of half-attention that precedes genuine inspiration. The default mode network requires one thing to activate fully: the absence of directed external stimulation. It requires, in other words, exactly what a phone in your hand prevents. There is a second Japanese concept that runs alongside ma and deepens the philosophy: Boketto, pronounced Boketto. written with characters suggesting an unfocused gaze, specifically the act of staring vacantly into the middle distance without any particular thought or intention. In Western culture, this state carries a faint social stigma. You are daydreaming, you are spacing out, you are not being present or productive or engaged. Someone asks what you are thinking about, and you say nothing, and that seems like the wrong answer. In Japan, Boketto is regarded not as absence, but as a particular kind of presence, a softening of the directed attention that allows something underneath it to breathe. It is not valued universally or discussed constantly because the Japanese rarely discuss things they consider obvious, but it is accommodated. It is allowed. A person sitting quietly, gaze unfocused, is not assumed to be wasting time. They are assumed to be somewhere that is their own business. The distinction matters because permission shapes behavior. When a culture tells you that the unfocused moment is waste, you fill it. When a culture tells you the unfocused moment is legitimate, you allow it. And what you allow to continue, continues. What you interrupt, atrophies. So does Beetle, the stone arrangement that follows no rule anyone taught him. These are the products of Boketto permitted to become something, of an unoccupied mind allowed to find its own direction, rather than being handed one. This is how children used to spend large portions of their afternoons before the device arrived and reclassified unstructured time as a parenting failure. There's a third concept, and it arrives from Zen practice, which has shaped Japanese culture's relationship with emptiness more profoundly than perhaps any other single influence. Mushin, pronounced Mushin, written with the character for no or without, mu, and the character for heart-mind, shin. Together, Mushin means no mind, or the state of mind without mind. In Zen and in the Japanese martial arts traditions, where it is most explicitly cultivated, Mushin describes the state in which the practitioner acts without the interference of conscious deliberation, without the running commentary of the thinking mind narrating and evaluating every movement. The archer who thinks about the shot misses. The archer who has practiced until thought is no longer necessary, who has entered Mushin, releases the arrow from a place of complete, clear, uncluttered attention. Mushin is not the same as boredom, but it shares boredom's essential requirement. The thinking mind must be allowed to step back. The constant, compulsive processing that fills every available moment with content, with noise, with judgment, with stimulation, is the opposite of Mushin. And the people who have lost access to boredom have also, without knowing it, lost access to the states of mind that boredom makes possible. Genuine absorption, spontaneous creativity, deep rest, and the quiet clarity that arises when the noise stops long enough for you to hear what you actually think. A study from the Mind and Life Institute, whose research has been published across multiple journals, including Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, examined the effects of what researchers called unstructured mental time on both well-being and cognitive performance in working adults. Participants who were given regular periods of unstructured time, no tasks, no devices, no directed activity, showed significant improvements in working memory, sustained attention, and reported sense of meaning and life satisfaction, compared to a control group. But the researchers noted something more striking than the outcomes: the participants' initial resistance. Most found the first sessions genuinely uncomfortable, even distressing. The absence of stimulation registered as a problem to be solved, a gap to be filled, an error to be corrected. It was only after several sessions, once the discomfort had been met and sat with rather than escaped, that the benefits began to emerge. The corridor had to be walked through before it opened into something else. Here is your first tactic, and it is the smallest possible beginning. Once today, just once, when you feel the automatic reach for your phone during a natural pause, stop the reach. Put the phone face down or leave it in your pocket and simply remain in the pause for 2 to 3 minutes. At a traffic light, waiting for coffee, sitting in the gap between one task and the next. Do not replace the phone with a book or music or any other stimulus. Simply be in the interval and allow whatever arises to arise without immediately redirecting it. The discomfort you feel in those 2 minutes is not a signal that something is wrong, it is the signal that the corridor is opening. That is the precise sensation of a capacity coming back online. It is uncomfortable the way a muscle is uncomfortable when asked to work after a long rest. That discomfort is the beginning of the practice, not the evidence against it. Here is the second practice, and it is the one that will produce the most immediately tangible result. Once each week, take a walk of at least 20 minutes with no audio input of any kind. No podcast, no music, no call, no voice message, nothing in your ears. Walk at a pace that feels natural, not driven. Let your eyes move where they want to go. Let your mind wander without trying to direct it toward anything productive or resolved. This is not meditation. You are not trying to clear your mind or maintain present moment focus. You are simply giving your default mode network the conditions it requires to do its work. What many people find, often beginning within the second or third walk, is that insights arrive without being summoned. Solutions to problems they had stopped consciously working on surface without effort. A quality of clarity about their own life, their own wants, their own direction becomes available that had been inaccessible while the ears were always full. This is not magic, it is neurobiology. It is soda and the beetle and the stones arranged in a pattern nobody taught him.
The third tactic is for the evening, and it is borrowed from Ma applied to the structure of the day. In the 30 minutes before you sleep, remove all screens and allow the day to end without content. No final scroll, no last episode, no reading of tomorrow's anxieties. Simply let the day be over, completely, without a digital epilogue. You can sit or lie quietly or do something slow with your hands. The point is the interval, the deliberate pause between the day and sleep that allows the mind to process what the day contained, to consolidate what matters and release what does not, to arrive at unconsciousness not as an escape from overstimulation but as a natural conclusion to a day that was allowed at its end to be quiet. Sleep research from the National Institutes of Health consistently confirms that the quality of this pre-sleep interval is one of the most significant predictors of sleep depth, memory consolidation, and morning cognitive clarity. The evening Ma is not wasted time. It is among the most productive 30 minutes of the day, precisely because nothing in it is trying to produce anything.
Soda will not remember the specific afternoon on the Ngawa. He will not remember the beetle or the stones or the exact quality of the light on the garden. What will remain, in a form that cannot be precisely located but can always be felt, is the knowledge, learned in the body before it was ever learned in the mind, that he is capable of being alone with himself without emergency, that the unoccupied moment is survivable, that something in him, given sufficient quiet, will always find something worth doing. This is not a small thing to know about yourself. For many adults who grew up before the device and have since forgotten it, recovering this knowledge feels less like learning something new and more like finding something they set down years ago, in a place they can now not quite remember, only to discover that it was never far, only buried briefly under the noise. If this video shifted something in the way you see the empty moment and what it is actually capable of producing, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more on how the world's wisest cultures quietly build minds that are sharper, calmer, and more deeply alive, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one.